I was a member of parliament and had been doing that for several years and was the shadow minister for trade and industry in South Africa, and then later finance, and I had a economics and finance background before that, and was very passionate about debating what needed to happen in the South African economy and where I felt the government was going awry, and trying to correct bad policy and so on. But I must be honest with myself, with limited impact. And I felt myself growing with a growing sense of frustration about what I felt was a limited impact that I was having as a member of the opposition in Parliament for several years. And then, of course, South Africa entered the pandemic, and it was a very, very tough time. Even before the pandemic, the South African economy has not grown meaningfully for much of the last decade or more. I had a young little girl, and I desperately wanted South Africa to be a place where she could grow up with a sense of hopefulness and optimism and opportunity for the future. I really have felt for many years that there is nothing fundamentally wrong with South Africa that cannot be put right and unlock enormous opportunity and growth and increasingly shared prosperity over time as well, if we could just get a few key policy decisions and reforms heading in the right direction. But I was deeply motivated by the sense that you had to do something useful. You could not get up every morning and make argument after argument about what you felt was going wrong and what needed to go in a different direction with a limited sense of impact. And so when I kind of cast my eye around the political playing field, it struck me that a wonderful place to really make a tangible difference is actually at the local government level, where so much of actual governing in South Africa happens, and actual investment and policy making that impacts on the lived experience of South African people and especially the poor. I summarize the difference between my old job and my new job as follows. In Parliament, I used to wake up every morning and say, what can I say today? As mayor, I get up every morning and think, what can I do today? And for me, that's a very meaningful difference that gives me a deep sense of purpose and makes this, I actually think, the most enjoyable and exciting job in South African politics, because I think it is the place where you can really have a sense of meaning and impact and purpose. I had read this book during lockdown called Duty, written by Bob Gates, a very long-serving defense secretary in the United States, who was not a military man, by the way. He was viewed with suspicion by the ranked and medaled members of the American military establishment. And he all of a sudden found himself in control of an organization that has an annual budget bigger than many countries' total GDPs. One of the insights that I really took from that book was the importance of focus. Try to address the really big things. You dare not tinker. You might be able to, achieve longevity and, I suppose, in some way feather your own nest, but you won't have achieved anything meaningful for the public, for the people you are trying to serve. And so I thought, what are the things that you really just have to address if you're going to make Cape Town a positive contributor to national GDP growth and national prosperity, and set up the city for decades of future success. One of the biggest failures of the South African state has been the shocking chronic underinvestment in gross fixed capital formation, basically public infrastructure, over the decades. In fact, we spend less now per capita on infrastructure than we did in 1994. And so it was very clear to me that we had made, over the years, a very conscious political decision to prefer consumption spending, things that are politically comfortable or attractive, over long-term investment, things that grow per capita GDP and overall wealth and prosperity over time. While Cape Town had been somewhat of an outlier, if we were honest with ourselves, Cape Town had also not kept up with the pressure of very rapid population growth and infrastructure needs in the city. If cities stop investing, they very, very quickly run into serious trouble, and we see that all over South Africa. And so we set about the most ambitious infrastructure program in South Africa by some distance. We are now investing double the city of Johannesburg and nearly triple the city of eThekwini, Durban, in infrastructure every year, and more than the next 5 smaller metros combined each year. And we will continue to do that for every year of this term of office. And the huge majority of that is going into quality of life improvements for the public, better water infrastructure, sewage reticulation, new sources of water, better public transport, and so on. The state's model of public housing has basically failed in South Africa. In fact, it's almost worse than that. It's actively reinforced apartheid spatial planning by preferring these large RDP developments on the outskirts of cities, usually where black and colored people already lived, where they were placed by apartheid, with very, very poor transfer of ownership. Most RDP homes in South Africa still belong to the state, and only with very poor public transport, so just entrenching and exacerbating and actually perpetuating apartheid spatial planning. So we said we've got to flip that on its head. We can't continue to perpetuate this. We have to look at proper inner city and affordable and more social models of housing. And I think one of the most exciting things happening in the South African housing space is happening in what we call small-scale rental units in Cape Town. And I won't go into too much detail about it, but it is, I think, South Africa's best hope of actually achieving the, at first, reduction and potentially at some point the elimination of informality and shack dwelling by allowing people to become proper micro-developers and unleashing market mechanisms in the small-scale development space, which provides affordable housing and begins to unstitch the legacy of apartheid. As a father, as all of us as South Africans, the priority or concern, worry number one was personal safety. I'm a big believer in this dictum that, do something, do what you can, where you are with what you have. 48% of murders in Cape Town are concentrated in just 10 police precincts in the city. And the other 50% are spread among the other 96. In a way, that's appalling. On the other hand, it's an opportunity to focus your resources where the problem really is and make a difference. We've actually seen, according to the Institute of Security Studies, the only place in South Africa where violent crime is ticking downwards is in the city of Cape Town, in those 10 precincts. So we're demonstrating that there is a model of success. You do not have to accept that the state can only fail. What really made me feel quite sad as a passionate South African was not that we had all these examples of failure, but that South Africans had started to become inured to them, that we had almost started to accept and expect that that was the best we could achieve. And I found that deeply sad. And so I wanted to demonstrate very practically that an alternative is possible, that it is possible for us to lift our collective gaze, to lift our standards, and to unashamedly set high standards in the public sector. And wherever you go in the private sector in South Africa, you have jaw-dropping moments where you are deeply impressed and inspired by what the private sector is able to achieve in our country. We have remarkable entrepreneurs, remarkable resilience and grit in our business community. And when last, if we are honest with ourselves, did we have that wow moment for something in the public sphere, in the public sector? And what I wanted to do was say, we need not accept that is a permanent feature of our future, that we cannot raise our standards above that it is possible to have a government that unashamedly desires, and aims for the standard of excellence. That's not to say that we will always achieve it, but we will always unashamedly and unrepentantly aim for it. And when we fail to achieve it, we will pull up our socks and take our learnings and try to do better. And all of us should expect that from all of our governments. We should not be a country that accepts subpar outcomes in the public sector. You can actually give people a sense that there is forward momentum, that there is a future of optimism and personal security and opportunity for them and for their children in our country. And that would be a really meaningful and purposeful thing to do. And that is what I am trying to do. Thank you very much.
I think that one of the biggest problems in Africa is the complete failure of political parties to present the choice between consumption and investment as an electoral choice. So I think that what you're proposing is noteworthy. However, I do have a question about the allocation of that. South Africa is essentially two countries in one. New Zealand for the minority and Kenya for the majority. In your budget, I noticed that you assert that 75% of the investment is going to, quote, lower income households. What is a lower income household in in Cape Town? How do you define it?
You know, it's obviously very easy to define people who live in informal settlements, in townships, what we call townships in South Africa, as being low income. It gets a little bit more difficult when you get to lower income working class communities. But essentially we looked at all of those communities where apartheid forced relocations had taken place and looked at what portion of our capital investment budget was being invested into those communities. The absolute lion's share of it is going into water and sanitation infrastructure, so pipe and capacity upgrades, sewer reticulation upgrades, better services in townships, and then the other lion's share is going into public transport, which is extremely expensive to build. And it's entirely focused. None of it is going elsewhere. It's entirely focused there.
Are your ratepayers happy with your allocation of CapEx to the townships?
I think there is, I definitely hear from time to time some unhappiness, and I do understand that if people are paying rates, they expect a certain standard of service and delivery for those rates. I also, though, my overwhelming experience is that South Africans are incredibly happy to pay their taxes so long as they know that it is being properly spent. And actually they are incredibly happy to see it being spent on people who are really poor and in need, provided, of course, that you maintain a certain standard of service in those areas where you are collecting the overwhelming majority of your income, of your revenue. And I think, Cape Town has some backlogs in that regard as well, frankly. So while our current investment program is almost exclusively focused in lower income areas, there is investment happening in other areas as well, and I think that that's necessary.
It's clearly beneficial for money to be put into investment in the existing townships. But I have to assume that the apartheid regime evicted forcefully various groups from their homes, like in District 6, because there were other groups which could benefit more. And that leads me to the question whether improving where they are now is the best use of investment money, or whether you should look even more ambitiously at relocating people to different and better places. How do you measure the trade-offs?
This is such a fascinating question. It goes to your first point. Every single expenditure decision in the state involves a trade-off. And we don't do nearly enough, neither in Ghana nor here, about educating the public as to what those trade-offs actually are. Because in a budget cycle, every state budget is a zero-sum game. You can't have more of everything. Of course, over the long term, you can have more of everything if you have a growing economy. But we haven't had that in South Africa for the longest time. Someone put it very crisply the other day that we've had largesse or profligacy for public sector workers and for state-owned companies, and we've had extreme austerity for public services. That is what South Africa's had over the last 10 years. And so every public service, from education to healthcare to housing, has suffered as a result. And so you face a very difficult public expenditure choice. Do you do a lot for a few people by building brand new homes at a cost of hundreds of thousands of rands and giving that asset to an individual person or family and helping them out of a township hopefully forever? Or do you do less for a greater number of people and help them by improving the quality of life, by improving services in the context where they already live? In South Africa, to go back to that housing policy discussion, you are actively incentivized as the state to perpetuate apartheid spatial planning because you are specifically capped. You can only spend X number of rand on a state-subsidized house. It has to look exactly a certain way. It has to use exactly these building materials. And so the people who deliver these projects, the officials who deliver these projects, are incentivized to find the biggest possible projects to deliver scale. And that means distant, large pieces of land. So we have to be comfortable if we are going to make a different choice, and I've tried really hard to reorient the city towards making a different choice. We have to lower our expectations for the quantity of homes that we're going to deliver because they are going to be more expensive to build high-density homes in the inner city areas and well-located areas. And we have to understand that we are not going to be able to help the number of people who obviously are in need. In Cape Town, we have 600,000 people living in informal structures, in shacks, roughly 600,000. And we can build, with the grants that we currently receive, about 3,500 a year. So you can just count in your head how many decades it's going to take. So you have to reorient it. And we have focused it on inner city housing, using high density developments with lower total numbers, but much better located, so you can do exactly what you're talking about. And then where we can't do that, quality of life improvements in township itself by rolling out better services, better infrastructure, new toilets, new taps, new roads, so on. So that's how we've tried to address that trade-off. It's not a simple either or. You have to find a place for the pendulum to settle somewhere in between.
I think there's a fundamental conflict and contradiction in people in your position. You have 16 months before the next local government election. But at the same time, you should be setting a vision for a city that faces deep challenges, threats, and opportunities over time. At the base of it, South Africa faces having about 35 million more unhoused people in a few of the cities, because the others won't attract them, over the next 25 to 30 years. Do you have a vision that you are building that you can entrench and leave behind? Thank you.
You know, Cape Town has just become a city of 5 million people. We've just crossed that mark. But we must be constantly thinking of what a Cape Town of 10 million people is like, and make the decisions now that are right for a Cape Town of 10 million people, because that's going to happen sooner than we think. And so we are really trying to actively focus on the long term. And of course, you're right, the political pressures, the media pressures, the incentives are stacked against long-termism and stacked in favor of short-termism. And the investments that we are making, some of these projects that we are breaking ground on now will not even finish by the time I'm done as mayor. And that's okay. These are investments that we are making deliberately for the long term, that are going to set up Cape Town as a resilient, successful city that can cope with growth for many years to come.
For someone like me that's been chipping away at the housing development crisis in the country for over 30 years and watching it grow despite all our best efforts, I'm kind of just dumbfounded by our inability, in Cape Town in particular, to deal with spatial inequality. What we really need is leadership that's prepared to make some unpopular choices. Leadership that's prepared to say to those of us who have, and certainly us in the room must count ourselves amongst those who have, that we have to give a little bit up. We cannot continue and expect the state to solve that problem on their own. Is there appetite from you over the remainder of your term to really challenge the people in Cape Town, the privileged people in Cape Town, to come to the party, no matter how big or small, to rearrange how we think about delivering housing in our city?
I think that across South Africa, really the backbone of the tax base is the middle class. They express and demonstrate incredible solidarity with fellow South Africans who are in more need, and give enormous amounts of themselves, of their income, of their time, to make South Africa and Cape Town better. For those of you who do live in Cape Town will know that we run a very redistributive tax system. We do not shy away from running a redistributive tax system, and that's mainly, again, from the middle class. So I really think that there's no reluctance from South Africans to give freely and generously when they know it is being properly spent in the right way with honesty and integrity. We can have a further debate about redistributing our small tax pool in this country. But that's not the real issue. The issue is that the tax pool is far too small. It's about making sure that there are more people with more. And that can only really sustainably be achieved through a growing economy. That is the most important discussion. That is the discussion that trumps every other discussion. How to grow this economy so that there are more resources to go around, so that we can do more for the poor. For public services, our fiscus has been shrinking every single year as money is siphoned off to other things. A little bit to corruption and state capture, an enormous amount to failing state companies. So that is the central issue, I think. Then just to say where I do agree with you is the one thing that we have to try and overcome is the phenomenon of NIMBYism, which is nothing, not in my backyard. And that is something that we run into a lot, particularly as we try to roll out more social housing. That social housing is deliberately designed to be in well-located areas, and we get an enormous amount of resistance from the community. And I read in The Economist, there's this brilliant acronym, which I think is even better than NIMBY. The Economist introduced me to the concept of a banana, which is build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. That is a banana. And we have lots of bananas. And so we have to overcome that. And I do have an appetite, Anthea, to set a vision that overcomes that, or tries to mobilize public support to overcome that banana phenomenon.
South Africa is a very unusual country in Africa, and actually, dare I say, in the world, in that it has more foreign assets than it has foreign liabilities. Okay? South Africa is a net creditor country when the United States is a net debtor country. If South Africa wants to solve all of these problems, it has the big advantage of looking first to its own, for its own capital. And when that is exhausted, it can look abroad. And that's a huge, huge, huge advantage. But of course, we need a politics which treats people as if they matter. And it's been a privilege to listen to Geordin. I remain unconvinced that he isn't motivated by his, like other politicians, by staying in power. But I think we could have him stay in power much longer than he probably will. And thanks for your remarks. Goodbye.